Good day everyone, Greg Satilla here for CRPGlegends.com, and I am back again with another review of an RPG that was ferociously loved by the few whom played it, and I am talking about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, an absolute cult classic of a role-playing game based on the license for the popular World of Darkness pen and paper game. The most common praise you will hear people remember about the game is the quality of the writing and the great characters, but they also never forget to mention the sheer amount of bugs, how parts of the game feel obviously unfinished, and how the combat is subpar at best. Bloodlines was developed by Troika Games, a company founded by three former Interplay developers whom were instrumental in developing the original Fallout game, and it takes us into the dark, seedy underbelly of Los Angeles in a world of the supernatural, where vampires manage their own affairs through an underground political system where we see constant power struggle from competing clans within, while also trying to protect themselves from external sources. The series' rich history makes for a really fun and well-developed world to create a story within, and the team at Troika did indeed cut a very interesting and mature path through this world. Like a few of the games that I have reviewed on CRPG Legends, initial sales for Bloodlines were really poor. The game was released on the same day as absolute juggernaut Half-Life 2 and was rushed out the door by publisher Activision, so we ended up with a half-baked game that starts out very strong and really begins to peter out near the end, as we can see the areas that are short-sighted and culminating in a rushed, rather hollow ending. So I am going to break down what this game does so well, but also what it does so poorly, because this game is one interesting mashup of great and suck. Quick disclaimer here, I'm using the VTMB unofficial patch version 10.8 for my playthrough. I did not install any of the additional content that this patch can include. I only did the bug fixes that it added in order to keep the game as close to the original as possible. I also installed an ENB to increase the game's in-game effects. It's actually crazy that this game is still being actively modded and fixed 16 years after release. This latest update came out in November of 2020. I do plan to play through the game with the other changes from the mod implemented at some point. I think it would be interesting to see what the community really did to the quests and models in this game. I will also put up a spoiler alert as well, as I do talk about some plot points throughout the game. We start with character selection, and it is interesting, especially if you are unfamiliar with the world as I was. The game doesn't contain traditional character classes, rather the vampire clan you are affiliated with acts as a kind of hybrid of traditional race and class systems such as in Dungeons & Dragons. The game tries to make it easy on beginners, as you get the option to answer a series of questions and have the game choose a clan for you based on your answers, rather than try to choose for yourself. I decided to go this route initially, but I did not agree with the vampire clan that the game thought I was best suited for. They chose the animalistic Gangrel clan, and I didn't think I would enjoy it, so I switched to the Tremere, which is more in lines with a mage class. After my playthrough though, I think I might have enjoyed some of the animalistic characteristics of the Gangrel. If you do go about the more traditional way of choosing a clan, you will be able to select from a drop-down list that features a blurb about each of the clans. The clans you choose have a dramatic effect on how you play the game, such as the Malkavian clan, a clan of vampires who soon after they are sired begin to hear voices and are soon driven insane as a result. And as a result of this, their dialogue options are written in slang and delivered in an almost riddle form. There is also the Nosferatu clan, whom are so obviously inhuman in appearance that they can't be seen in public and need to traverse the world via the sewer system. All clans have special abilities that give them some sort of advantage and some sort of disadvantage, although some are much more dramatic than others. After choosing your faction, you move on to your character sheet and get to put some points into attributes, abilities, and disciplines, and those stats affect your feats listed on the right hand side. Your ability to fight, pick locks, hack computers, persuade, seduce, and so forth. As you proceed in the game, you are given additional points for completing quest objectives along the way, not for killing enemies. So, there is never a need to fight or grind enemies in order to level up, although leveling up does increase your ability to fight immensely. After completing my first playthrough and seeing how the systems in the game work, I think I would go a totally different route than I did in my first time, as a majority of my points went into blood magic and ranged weapons, and I managed to do a serviceable job with them. However, it appears that melee might be the most effective way to fight in the game, but we will dive into combat a little later. The game itself kicks off with you being sired as a vampire during a late night tryst, and you wake up to your door being kicked in and you and your partner are staked, which apparently in this world doesn't kill vampires, rather immobilizes them. You are then brought before the Camarilla, an organization of clans who seem to run the vampire world in Los Angeles. Pretty much every person at this meeting has some importance in the vampire world, and you will come across them at some point in the game. It is here where we learn from the Camarilla leader, Prince LaCroix, that there are rules for siring a vampire, and I was an illegal siring. And as a result, the vampire who sired me is sentenced to be executed. This is done so before the Camarilla by beheading. My character, however, is spared this fate, and I begin my life as a fledgling vampire as an errand boy for Prince LaCroix, being sent to Santa Monica to do some unknown task. But before we go, we are met by another vampire named Jack, who takes us under his wing and shows us the ropes in a tutorial for the game, teaching us how to suck blood, how there are different areas in the game. One's meant for combat, where you are allowed to kill. One's meant for the Masquerade, where you must appear human. And one's meant for being among your vampire peers, where you aren't allowed to use any of your blood powers. At this point, we are attacked by another vampire sect, the Sabbat. This appears to be an independent group outside the Camarilla who are like a different vampire religion and don't agree with the beliefs of the Camarilla and want to usurp our power. This encounter acts as the tutorial of the game as we learn the systems as we survive the attack and witness the Camarilla drive back the Sabbat before moving on to the first real hub of Bloodlines. The game is divided into several different hubs that represent different parts of Los Angeles, and they are Santa Monica, Downtown, Hollywood, and Chinatown, and each one is designed so they seem bigger than they actually are, and each of the locations do feel unique. Quests within each hub tend to have you moving around within that hub, meeting other key vampire players and helping solve mysteries for them or simply run errands for them, which gives you more information about the world around you and what you are getting yourself involved in. The first hub of Santa Monica opens up a lot of interesting mysteries in the world that we want to get to the bottom of, and some really memorable set pieces that showcase just what kind of dark and twisted world we have become involved in. There is a late night radio show that plays on stereos throughout the game, and like any good late night radio show, is full of fun interactions with late night callers, but also keeping you updated on the latest news, where we learn that there is a murderer on the loose, committing grisly murders so bloody that they won't let anyone come within sight of the latest crime scene. We also learn that there is a mysterious ship that has been found lifeless, carrying an ancient sarcophagus on board, but absolutely no living person was found. These threads are sprinkled to us along the way as we try to fulfill our initial task for the prince, which is to blow up a warehouse. The game does an absolutely great job of world building early on. We are introduced to the different layers of vampire society. We learn about ghouls, who are humans who drink the blood of vampires and gain some of their powers and don't age. We also learn of thin bloods, which are like lower class vampires who are less powerful than your standard fare vampire. We learn about the underground market for blood from the blood bank. The game really does a great job of getting us acclimated before diving deeper into the main story in the second hub of Downtown. Unfortunately, as promising as these threads appear to be, and the amount of fun you have investigating these mysteries ultimately leads to disappointment, as the story resolves with one of the most lackluster endings you could imagine, especially in a game that showed such a high level of writing and story building. Santa Monica introduces us to the hypersexuality of this vampire world. Vampires tend to own businesses that are active at night, as we see many points of contacts in the vampire world owning bars or clubs or other late night establishments. So a lot of the game includes adult themes as we investigate strip clubs, peep shows, pornography studios, snuff films. It is a very adult game, and it uses these settings to make jokes, but they also treat the material seriously enough that within the world of the game, it is believable. This game could have easily devolved into a bunch of dumb dick jokes, but it doesn't. It's dark and provocative and alluring. Although there is plenty of dark humor in the game, it is always treated in a way that it doesn't become self-parody. A lot of the humor is contained within that game's excellent side quests that I always felt compelled to do in every zone. You really want to suck up every morsel of the story in this game. It is that enjoyable. I forgot I could go back to my laptop to check emails, so I know I missed several side quests along the way, which makes me sad. All the characters were so much fun to meet and interact with, I wish I hadn't missed any of the quests.
The sin bin? Man, we've got filth of every flavor. Just tell me what makes your bits tingle, Jack. I'll set you right up.
The early quest lines take us to a couple of the most memorable places in the game. The first being Gimble's Prosthetics, which is a pleasant enough looking generic business based on the waiting room where Stanley Gimble creates prosthetics for people with disabilities and wants to hire me as a limb model. Something about the whole thing seems a little off, and when you go into the back rooms, you find it to be a sadistic torture palace for Stanley Gimble, who locks up his victims and slowly removes people's limbs. When you confront him, he even attacks you with a severed limb. The other is the very memorable Ocean View Hotel, one of the finest set pieces of horror in a video game. It's especially impressive that it occurred in a game released in 2004. It was very well done. As we are sent into the dilapidated remains of a partially burnt hotel in order to get an item which belonged to a ghost that was apparently haunting the building. This little mini level has us enter the hotel, and immediately light bulbs start popping around us and items begin to move, and a story unfolds before us of a husband driven insane by jealousy when he believes a pendant that his wife's mother sent her was sent to her from some unknown lover, and he is driven insane with jealousy over their stay at this hotel before murdering his wife and son and burning the hotel down. We navigate collapsing staircases, explosive boiler rooms, and an angry poltergeist before finding the pendant and escaping. It really was an anxiety-producing level, and one of the all-time great set pieces in gaming. And this isn't the only standout level in this game, and the beauty of it all, no combat necessary. In another excellent level, we are sent to the mansion of the Malkavian clan leader Grout, who has gone missing, and as we explore the mansion, we discover a series of audio tapes that play very similar to what we would later see used much more explicitly in BioShock.
It is quite peculiar, the happenings I've been made to witness for my supernatural longevity. I am thinking of one unfortunate phenomenon in particular, of unique interest to my station, both as a professional and as a sufferer of this vampiric condition. It seems the stream of time has begun to erode the moorings of my chosen course of study, for the methodologies that gave birth to psychology are slowly disappearing. I find...
These audio tapes fill us in about how this former doctor had been working tirelessly to find a cure for a disease that was killing his wife. It was at this time he was attacked by a patient and becomes a vampire. He learns of the vampire community and that he is part of the Malkavians and that he will slowly begin to hear voices and the call of insanity. So he begins to work tirelessly for a cure to his vampirism and putting his wife in stasis until he can cure them both. However, Grout begins to fall victim to his insanity, and we appear to find his corpse chained to his bed exposed to the sunlight, his wife still in stasis nearby, a cure for her disease nowhere closer to being found. It's really a tragic story. The mansion itself is also a twisted maze full of dark secrets and insane Malkavian followers, as you have to unlock your way through each area of the manor to find Grout's final resting place. This is also where I began to understand the twisted dance of the combat in the game, leaving one person alive to be tranced where I could kill them by sucking their blood and regaining life and power before moving on to the next room. This is also where we begin to see much more combat in the game. You are introduced to the best part of the game early on though, which is talking with the top-notch cast of characters and top-tier quality voice acting that are in this game. One thing the Source engine does remarkably well, even better than some engines today, is to do an awesome job depicting facial expressions. The character models in this game are excellent. Characters emote believably, and the dialogue is written at such a high level and delivered so well that the game has no difficulty really getting you engaged early on.
Does he now? You know, we just ended a war with them and we lost a lot of people. Too many. Does he expect us to do all the fighting while the Camarilla throws mean looks from the sidelines? Or are they ready to go toe-to-toe with those goddamn devils?
It felt like one of those games where every time you shut it off you were sad, and every time you picked it back up you would be so happy to return. It is these characters that are so fun to interact with, and some of the quests they ask you to do and their results are so funny and interesting, it's hard not to get excited for every interaction. Early on, we meet the unique twin sisters, Jeanette and Teresa, figures of power within the Santa Monica community that have completely opposite personalities. There are fun, mysterious characters like Mr. Ox in Chinatown that has you doing strange quests like gathering eyeballs. Even the most random of NPCs seems to have some interesting quirks to them that makes the world fun to explore. I normally like to talk about the villains within the storylines of games, as many RPGs send you on some grand quest to defeat some overpowering villain. Well, the villain in Bloodlines is not some demonic, ancient, powerful god or some all-powerful force, but it is also not some random, shadowy third party they introduce at the end of the game either. The main villain for the majority of people that play through the game is probably going to be the Camarilla Prince, LaCroix, and he is central to the plot for the entire game. He is the person that orders the execution of the vampire that sires you, and you remain his errand boy for the majority of the game, and he gives you insight into his plans to consolidate and keep his power. The game does a good job of using LaCroix as a villain. A game doesn't need some super powerful demigod as the big baddie in order to have a serviceable villain. The villain just needs to have a significant impact and presence in the world and life of the hero in order for us to have a connection with them. I think a lot of games forget this and put in some random world-ending monstrosity near the end, or reveal some hidden figure that seems imposing but has no attachment to the player and doesn't really mean much in the long run. LaCroix is definitely more than a subtle villain, but as we spend more time with him, we realize he is more concerned with his personal power than he is of bettering the lives of the vampire community in LA. I enjoyed overthrowing his reign, and if you decide that in the end you do agree with LaCroix after all, well, you are given the opportunity to side with him in the end if you truly wish. I want to take this time to mention a really fun part of the experience. This game does so well with minor characters. It introduces us to a character named Officer Chunk, a security guard, and the game continually makes us think that Chunk may be dead. In one area, we see a crucified doppelganger, only to find out later it wasn't Chunk. At another time, we see the building that Chunk is a security guard for has been attacked, and there is blood everywhere. But later, once again, we find that Chunk had called in sick after getting food poisoning and was still alive.
Chief, you believe what happened the other night? I couldn't come into work on account I bought a tamale from a street vendor and got to scoot something terrible. What a lucky thing, too, because that food poisoning saved my life.
We really get attached to Officer Chunk, and in my playthrough I had a chance to kill him, and I just couldn't do it. This is the kind of creative character building that this game does so well before all the wheels come off for the climax of the game. This is all backed by top tier scoring. The backing music is absolutely oozing with these gothic, dreary, vamp-inspired songs. It really helps to heighten the mood and set the tone of the game. Rick Schaefer's work is a highlight of exploring this world. It is what I would expect a backing track to a 2004 gothic adventure in LA to sound like. Now that we've covered a good deal of the superlatives in this game, it's time to tackle the not so great parts of the game, which is mostly in the mechanics of the game. Some of the mechanics you use in the game world are not bad at all, such as the lockpicking and the hacking systems, in which success is based on whether your lockpicking or hacking skill is as high as the lock or password difficulty level. Lockpicking and hacking are generally used to circumvent searching for a key or a password for story quests, but they also lead you to find hidden areas. The game also has a stealth system, which for the most part is very generous with how much leeway you have when stealthing after you put a few points into it. Basically, the stealth system shows you a detection meter that raises to 100 as you get closer to detection. It can be pretty funny at times how you can clearly be skulking around right next to someone in a well-lit area and not have them notice you. Finally, there is the combat and power system, and we saved the worst for last because the combat throughout this game is pretty awful. Especially guns, which start off pitifully weak and don't improve until much later in the game when you finally get some better artillery. Melee combat is done in third person and gun combat is done in first person, and overall the controls are really floaty, especially so in third person with awkward animations and hit detection. Powers are awkward to use in the flow of combat, and overall it isn't a very fun part of the game. And did I mention guns are really weak? Luckily for us, in the first 70-ish% of the game you can avoid a lot of combat with stealth. It's a shame combat is so awful that it's a more enjoyable experience to avoid it as much as you can. My character was not initially built for stealth, but I was able to toss him a few points, which helped out quite a bit, although I still put points in ranged, hoping my gun damage would improve as my clan did not allow me to maximize myself as a fighter. I needed to develop my blood powers in order to be more effective. Once you did max out your blood powers, they were quite effective when they could be used, as one spell caused an enemy's blood to boil to the point of bursting explosively and generally taking out all the other enemies in the general area when it happened. In some levels though, there were a lot of obstructions, making it hard to use some of these powers. In the end, it was quite a learning curve figuring out how to manage the combat section. In the beginning of the game though, combat can be avoided. There aren't many fortresses full of enemies to dispatch at the beginning outside of the warehouse, and if you are anything like me, then in one of the early missions where I needed to infiltrate a house of mobsters, I was so frustrated with the combat and dying to them over and over that I switched to stealth, which I used to avoid combat for almost the whole first hub, as for the most part you are talking to peers within the vampire community, running errands for them, and some of these quests might have some brief combat encounters, but it keeps things relatively calm, allowing you to put some points into combat talents that definitely will be needed in the second half of the game. Sadly, the amount of combat and non-dialogue sections of the game really ramps up in the second half. There's one excruciatingly long maze that we have to follow to gain access to the Nosferatu area of the game. It can be hard to sneak through, and I became extremely frustrated with this section as I wasn't quite stealthy enough to avoid a lot of the combat. I was so upset and frustrated with this area, I forgot to capture any footage of it as I was so focused on just getting through it. I remember it was late at night, I wanted to finish the maze before going to bed, and I was at the highest level of irritation I would have with the game. And in the end, the maze leads to one of the most underwhelming areas of the entire game. The Nosferatu place of hiding has a dirty cave system with a handful of NPCs, and that's about it. Apparently they wanted the area to be so much bigger and well developed, but they had to rush the game out to hit the deadline. And from this point on, you can tell the game feels rushed. The game is soon so padded with all these long combat levels, and the story narrows down to focus on retrieving the sarcophagus you've been investigating for so long, and all these wonderful side quests just seem to disappear. The amount of boss battles also significantly increased in the later game, and it begins to feel like nothing but combat with very little exposition. I just became tired of going from room to room killing everything, especially since I had developed this character with a lot of charisma and who was very adept at navigating social situations, and I was having to shoot everything or blow it up with blood magic. The boss battles were no joke either, for the most part. Most are really big bullet sponges combined with the fact that the guns really seem to do really poor damage and melee combat is awkward. It took the fun out of these fights. This wasn't Dark Souls where you felt like you really beat a boss. It was like you kept trying a boss until they glitched and got stuck on something and you were able to finally pump enough bullets into them that they die. The final sections just kept throwing more and more enemies and bosses at you, and you move from section to section with a chance to buy supplies, but that's it. Just from one combat area to another, being driven by some mysteriously prophetic cab driver. You do all this at the end only to get a set of endings so bad that you almost think that it's a joke. None of the game's 4 endings will satisfy any of the curiosity that is built up so effectively over the course of the campaign. In the end, it's a real slap in the face, especially since you can tell the game is being developed with a high level of care and attention to detail at the start, and they just ran out of time, and the polish just starts to fall off. I feel bad for game developers who can't deliver the finished product they wanted to because of time crunch. The game probably could have used another year to get where I assume the developers wanted it to be. There is no way that this game contains the ending that they would want to showcase. Which brings me to this. The game was released in such a bad state that even after so many bug fixes patched in from the community over 16 years spent working to fix the issues in this game, I still had to reload my games for so many weird bugs. In the junkyard chase level, I had cars that blocked my path so I couldn't move any further or proceed and I had to reload. I had games where when I reloaded in the middle of stealth sections, my gun was stuck on automatic fire, spraying everywhere and alerting all the guard. Many doors would get stuck. People would float a little bit off the ground randomly. Some of the animations were unfinished or looked absolutely ridiculous. Walking over debris made your character get kinda stuck all the time. There were all kinds of small little glitches and bugs which made the game frustrating. Even with all these issues though, and there were so many more at the time of release, this game still received really good reviews because the majority of the game and the story is just an absolute blast to be a part of. It's funny how this game has managed to have such a cult status and people love it even though it's so broken and has an absolute mess of a combat system because it gets so many other fun parts right. Bloodlines can be a real train wreck of a game sometimes. Bugs can frustrate you, making you redo sections multiple times, and the story does not come to a satisfying conclusion whatsoever. But you know what? I want to play the game again just to run around doing the side quests and talking to all the interesting people, ghouls, and vampires. It's a world that makes great use of a license to feel believable within its own boundaries, and that's the key to make even a bad game extremely fun to be in and play within. So if I had to give this game a number score out of 10, I would probably give it a 6.5 or 7 out of 10 because despite it being extremely fun, it is also at times very unfun. But I would still recommend to play it. Hell, even if you just throw on God mode near the end to deal with the waves of enemies. The rest of the game is worth the inconvenience. I also have to put this killer skullet ponytail into the video and this woke Nicolas Cage painting. These were definite highlights of my playthrough and I wanted people to see them. So, thanks so much everyone. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. I have my Patreon and my Twitch stream as well as my website linked below, as well as my podcast with my good friend Apox. See you next time. We have Cyberpunk 2077 coming December 9th from the sounds of it, and we'll be focusing a lot of time on that game. Thanks a lot.